I'm writing a dissertation about allegory and agency in late medieval literature. But this summer, as a computational thinking fellow, I wanted to explore some different kinds of questions. Namely, what can natural language processing methods, or NLP for short, bring to literary studies and medieval texts? And also, what can't they do very well? NLP is basically the broad term that covers computational methods for understanding and processing language and text. There's a lot of excitement as well as skepticism about what we can do with it. As you'll see, this was very much an open-ended learning journey that didn't necessarily have a clear-cut solution. I'll walk us through the process, through some of the different questions that I opened and closed and explored. I started with what I thought was a modest proposal. One of the medieval poems that I work on is called Pearl, which is a stunningly beautiful elegy written by an anonymous West Midlands poet in the late 14th century. The Pearl poet also wrote 3 other poems, and it's disputed whether or not he wrote a 5th, titled St. ERKENWALD. I had read about an NLP project that trained a machine learning model to identify Jane Austen texts, so I thought I could do the same with the Pearl poet and St. ERKENWALD. I could train the model on the 4 poems by the Pearl poet. It might identify features like word choice, engrams, which are words that are likely to be used together, sentence structure, such as lexical and syntactical features, frequent topics or themes, and potentially even poetic elements like alliteration or rhyme. Then based on the model, I could generate a percentage possibility that the Pearl poet also wrote St. ERKENWALD. And I thought that the model might also teach me something about the poems themselves too, almost as another mode of close reading. Unfortunately, this didn't pan out for a couple reasons. The main one was that I actually couldn't get a digitized version of all 5 poems in the same edition or translation. The other was that the model almost certainly wouldn't have had enough precision and subtlety for poetry versus Austinian prose. Poetry has much more variation and virtuosity than prose, and there's no way to measure those poetic elements as features. I couldn't figure out how I could build alliteration, rhyme, caesura, stanzaic form into features of my model, especially given that these poetic elements vary significantly across the 4 poems to begin with. Instead, I decided to focus on the Pearl poem and generate what are called word vectors to try to learn something about its allegorical dimensions. So this was kind of take 2. A couple explainers here. Many concepts in the Pearl poem are multi-layered or allegorical. For example, the Pearl stands for a jewel, for the dreamer's lost daughter, and for the kingdom of heaven. At any point, these polysemous, multi-layered allegorical meanings intermingle and inflect one another. Word vectors are n-dimensional arrays that represent the meanings of words. You might have, let's say, a 50 by 1 vector, so 50 numbers, that together represent the word pearl. Given the vector, you can also see what words are similar and dissimilar to pearl. You can even do vector arithmetic. So, for example, most famously, early on, Thomas Mikolov, a researcher at Microsoft, created a set of word vectors that showed king plus woman minus man is approximately equal to queen, just using the word vectors. Here we can see the word-spec model that I generated for Pearl, and here's the actual word vector for Pearl. It's a 25 by 1 vector. But unfortunately, my corpus was simply too small to produce anything meaningful. The Pearl poem is only 1,212 lines long, so it's hardly enough to train on. The most similar words to Pearl were probably just the most used words, they, I, thee, etc. Even if it were longer, I'm not sure it would have picked up on its allegorical dimensions and linked Pearl to daughter and heaven, or maybe also linked stream to desire and Christ. But the idea of word vectors seemed promising, so I decided to try kind of a different idea. Through a circuitous route helped by the folks at the Classical Language Toolkit and Nathan Stringer at Utah, Akshay Breha and I got a hold of a Middle English corpus, which was probably scraped from the University of Michigan's corpus of Middle English prose and verse, and were able to train word vectors on this much larger corpus. As we can see, the word vectors have much more significant meaning embedded in them. Pearl, for instance, is most similar to round, and scripture and Wycliffe. Wycliffe was one of the earliest medieval advocates of a vernacular translation of the Bible. These words are similar to book, parties, writing, author, etc. Finally, one neat thing was that the model I trained actually produced the result that Mikolov originally came up with. The vector king plus woman minus man was approximately equal to queen. That was the most similar result. So overall, since this corpus is so much bigger, there's a lot more meaning and precision in these word vectors. We could potentially do more with these word vectors. For instance, like create a doc2vec and compare how similar texts are to one another. I hope that this video gives you a sense of some of the possibilities and challenges of NLP tools. Maybe you can answer some of the questions that I didn't quite get to this summer.